Hey everyone. In this walkthrough, I'm going to cover a couple of topics, um, migrations and associations. So these two things can be pretty confusing and just hard to grasp at first until you do them a few times. Sometimes it takes numerous times of messing with them, coding an application for it to all click. It did for me, and it does for most people. So don't feel bad if they're pretty confusing at first, but we're going to walk through the basics of these two things in Sequelize today, just to show you in the power of Sequelize and how much it saves you in the writing of code and the time spent doing more complex things like these, like joins and stuff like that. So I have an empty project here, nothing in there. So I'm going to go ahead and initialize it. Then I'm going to install some packages. So I'm going to install Express, Sequelize, MySQL 2, body parser, and Express handlebars. So we'll be using handlebars as well in this. I'll go ahead and get those installed. And now that I have Sequelize, the package installed in my project, I can use the CLI. So the CLI is a great tool that we use to speed up the process of creating all our models, our migrations, and also seeding our database and stuff like that. We won't go into that today, but maybe later on I'll create a walkthrough for that as well. So if you haven't installed the CLI yet, you would do npm install sequelize-cli-g, and that will install it globally to your system so you can use it in any project folder. And once you do, then you can run Sequelize. And since I have the package installed, it gives me a list of all the commands I can run. If you don't have the package installed, you'll see an error, so just be aware of that. And this list of commands gives us all the options and everything we need to get up and running. One of the first commands I'm going to run is this init command. So out of the box, if you just run init by itself, it gives you all of the folders and sets you up with kind of a scaffold or a boilerplate kind of code to start you up with. So I'll go ahead and run that, Sequelize init. And if we look at the project now, you'll see I have all these folders. The config one I'm sure you probably have all seen before. So this config file is how we connect to our server, or MySQL server. The cool thing about this is though is you have these different objects for different environments. So for instance, if you're on Heroku or another platform you're hosting your application on, you can use this one for the production environment and set your connection settings up here for that, and then you have your own local, like on your computer developing. All those connections would go up here. So it's really nice to be able to have all those different connection settings. I've created a database called Sequelize Migrations, which I will use today for this example. I'm going to come over here to SQL Pro. I'm going to go ahead and just delete all the data I've already made, playing around. And we're going to start fresh with nothing. I'm also going to go to the to Google over here to Chrome, and I'm going to type in Sequelize and just go to the docs link here. And what I'm looking for is this right here, this option that we pass into our connection. And this will keep the deprecation warnings from happening in the terminal because I don't like to see those. So this will remove those for us. I'm going to go ahead and just wrap that in double quotes. Save, and we're good to go with our connection file since my username is root and I don't have a password, so the default works for me. Okay, so folders we have the migrations folder, we have a models folder with an index file in it. If you're not aware of this, this index file is kind of how we just get all of our models from any file. So this I'll walk through it very briefly. This file, we start with an empty object here. It will loop through and import basically all of the files, or pull all of the files in your models folder other than the index. So right here it's kind of skipping over the index file but looping through every other file. And for each file it's going to import that, whatever it's exporting. In that case it's going to be a function, right? Our models are going to be like a function that we're exporting. It's going to import that function, it's going to call it, it's going to pass it a couple of things. It's going to create a model in Sequelize, and then it's going to attach that model to this object. So for every model you create, every model file you have, it's going to create a property representing that model in this object. And then at the very bottom, we just export that object. So if you import this file, you have access to every single one of your objects. And it just makes it easier to, deal with and work with all your models. All right, so then we have the seeders folder, which, like I said before, I'm not going to go into seeders today, but we can go over that at a later time. That's just a way of like inserting dummy data into your database for testing and stuff like that. So a lot of times you need a lot of data to really figure out how your application works with a lot of data. So when you don't want to do that manually, you have you can use a bunch of tools to create some dummy data for you, and the seeders are used for that. Okay, so moving forward, now that we have the init done, we can start with our migrations. But the first thing we need to do is we need to create a model. So from a model, the CLI is going to create a migration as well. And it's really easy to create models in the terminal with the CLI. We just run Sequelize and then model : and create. That's the command to create a model. And then you need to pass it some options. So these options are required. These two options are required. The first one is name. So we do -- name. And then the name of the model. So I'm going to call it shop. In my example today, I'm going to represent like a coffee shop. So the coffee shop is going to have coffees. So we'll have two different models, one for the shop and one for the coffees. And then when we get into the associations and relationships, the coffees are going to belong to the shop. So the shop will have a bunch of coffees, and that's going to be the how those two models tie together. But right now we're just going to work on the basic migration and getting that up and running. So I need to continue here with the second option, which is the attributes option. And these are the fields that you pass in that your actual item in the database is going to have. So I'm just going to have one field for the shop, and that's going to be a name, and it's going to be a string. So you just type in whatever name the field's going to be, and then a : and then the type of that field. So that's how easy it is. I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see it created the model. And if I go back, we now have a new model file in our models folder. And I like to go in and just rename this. For some reason, there's probably an option for this, but I haven't really researched it. It lowercases all of your model file names, and I like to have them capitalized, so it's not a big deal. I just go in and capitalize the model names. And if we look at our model, you'll see it's the basic function type. So we're exporting a function. That function, now this of course is an arrow function, an ES6. So just be aware of that. If you are not up on your ES6 yet, I've covered ES6 and before, I believe, with you. But a good thing to do would be to go to YouTube or resources like that, and find some videos on ES6. There's plenty of them out there to get up to speed on these arrow functions. But moving on, we are receiving the Sequelize object and the data types object, which is how you set your type. Of course, this has all been created for us already. The variable shop, the model, and then it defines the model name. So here, this is important. if you're not using migration. So just remember, if you're using the sync method, which when I'm saying sync, I mean this method that Sequelize uses to automatically create your tables. It will read, as long as you sync your model, it will automatically read your fields and create a table for you based on your schema you set up here, right? But since we're using migrations, we don't really need to worry about it. So I will leave this as is, just a capital shop for my model name. Just remember, this is the actual name that you're setting here, not your variable. That has nothing to do with it. It's this name in the string here. And then this associate method here, we won't worry about it right now. That's how we actually set up our associations. We'll do that in a second. And then it just returns the model file, which in turn is pulled in the index here, and a model is created from that and then attached to the outgoing object, which we can import anywhere and use any of our models. So pretty awesome kind of methodology there and paradigm they're using for this. And if we go into our migrations, there's a file that's been created. So this is automatically created when you make a model. And here it's just an exported object, and it has two methods. And these two method names, up and down, are common across the board in multiple programming languages. So if you've ever dealt with another language, you might have seen this before. If you ever have seen migrations or read anything about migrations or watched a video, there's this concept called up and down, right? We up a table and we destroy it running the down, right? So this is what's going to happen. A migration is simply an object that has some methods on it that will create a table and then or do some other things like update a column or something like that. But in this case, it's going to be just a basic create a table. And then if we need to, we can also run this to destroy the table, so to get rid of it. And that's for, like when you might add some fields to your table or remove a field or update a field or something like that. And you need to, basically just remove that table and then pop it back into the database again. That's why this method is very important for that, so we can quickly just remove it and then add it back again. Okay, so getting into our fields, you'll notice that my shop model only has the name attribute, or the name field, right, that I set when I created the model. But Sequelize has made some other fields for us automatically. The ID field, which we need, the created at, these are kind of optional, right? But they're really important when it comes to, organizing and dealing with your data later on. You can pull when an item was actually created in the database, and every time that item is updated at any time, this field will be updated, and you'll also be able to have that time and day when that happened, which is pretty cool. So here's our table name, and so this query interface object that's been pulled in from the function here or sent through is calling this create table, and here's the name of our table. So in this case, it's a capital shops, right? So how does it get this name? Like, if you ever wondered, if you look at the model name is shop, capital shop. So Sequelize will look at this name and create the table name based on that model name. And the normal convention is it's going to assume the plural version of this name. So in this case, that's right. Sometimes it's a little bit off. Most of the time, it's pretty smart and gets the plural, version right. So shops is going to be the name of our table, but I don't like it to be capitalized. So another normal convention is for the table to be lowercase. So I will just change that. And down here also, we need to make sure this one is lowercase. And at this point, we're ready to run our migration. So running a migration just basically means we're going to tell Sequelize to read this file and then run the up method. And it's going to create a table based on these fields. And that's all it's basically going to do at this point, right? So let's run it. So let's do Sequelize and then you do db colon and then migrate and just hit enter. And there we go. So now if we look at our database, if I go back to SQL Pro and refresh, we now have this shops table. So just be aware that this Sequelize meta table will be created as well. And it's just a way of tracking all of the migrations that you have made. So Sequelize uses this table for that. I'll go ahead and delete those two, and we should be good to go. Now, if at any time you needed to like remove that table that you made and make a change to it and remove it, all you have to do is run Sequelize db migrate colon undo to do the last migration, or colon all at the end of that to undo all the migrations you've ran. So now if I run that and go back and refresh, you'll see that we lost our shops table. It's gone, and that's how it works. So it simply just removes it. But we're going to keep that, so we're going to go ahead and run it again. So our table has been created again. And now we should be good to go with our migrations, right? That's the basics of migrations. So let's move on to associations. And in doing so, before we start, let's go ahead and create our coffee model. So remember how I said we're going to have coffee shop, and the shop is going to have coffees. So we need a model for that. Let's go back and run Sequelize model create. The name of it's going to be coffee. And our fields are going to be name, which is a string. And I'm going to have type, which is also a string. And that's going to be like the type of roast, like dark roast, medium roast, light roast, that kind of deal. So that's just the two fields that I've made for this coffee. We're keeping it really simple today. If we come back, we now have our coffee model. Of course, it's lowercase, so I'm just going to go and rename that with the capital C. And if we look, we have our two fields that have been created. And then we go into our migration file, and we will change this. I'll just select both of those and just change the capital C to a lowercase. But there's one thing we need. Yes, we have all the basic fields made for us, but there's one field it didn't make that we're going to need because we're going to be creating an association. So this model is going to be related to the shop model, or this table is going to be related to the shop table. So think of it like this way. Shop is going to be the parent, and it's going to have children, which are coffees, right? So there has to be some way of associating a shop with its coffees. So every time we create a coffee, it's going to be related to one particular shop. And to do that, we just basically need to attach the ID of that particular shop to our coffee each time a coffee is made. So we're going to have, a whole bunch of shops, but when we make a coffee, it's got to be attached to that particular shop. And we can just simply use the ID of the shop on our coffee item when it's made to do that, to make that really easy association. And that's called a foreign key. So our foreign key is a field that's an ID, like a number, associated with an ID from another table. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to attach the shop ID number to the coffee. So I'm going to make a field here called shop ID, and it's going to be, let's see, type Sequelize dot, and it's going to be an integer, because our IDs are all integers, right? So that's why I'm setting this to an integer as well. Okay, so now that we have this field, we can run the migration because we have our foreign key set up. So every time we make a new coffee, it's going to have the shop associated with it, that ID also added to the item. All right, so let's go back and run this migration simply by running Sequelize db migrate, and it's only going to run the migrations that haven't been run yet, right? So the other one has been run already. So now if I refresh, we have both of our tables. And if you look, we have that extra field there, shop ID, that we're going to need for the association. So now let's go into our model files. So in the shop file, it's going to work like this. It's going to be like this. It's going to be the shop has many coffees, right? Now there's a method we're going to be running, and the method, if you didn't guess already, is called has many. This is the type of association that we're making because the shop is going to have many coffees, right? And that's going to be like a child of shop. So simply, all you have to do is run shop has many, but now we need to pass the coffee model in. So you might think we should import the coffee model in this file, and then we could pass it into here. But you don't actually have to do that because Sequelize makes it easy by calling this function, and it passes you all of your models that you have in this object right here. So all I have to do is just do models dot and then coffee, and I've just passed the model into this method. Okay, so that's the relationship as far as the shop goes, right? Because it's going to have a bunch of coffees. But now we need to go into coffee here, and we need to set up the association here. So, and that's going to be coffee belongs to a shop. So whenever a new coffee is made, it's going to belong to a particular shop. And we do that by running coffee dot belongs to models dot shop. So now that we've set up our associations, it's really as easy as that. If you were wondering, I'm going to save this. Now we can run some tests on this just to see how it works. But the first thing I need to do is go ahead and set up a server file. So let's create a server.js file. And I'm going to use ES6 in this instance today for some stuff, most of the stuff. And we're really going to be working mainly in this file, the server file, with all of our routes and everything. I'm just going to keep it pretty basic and simple today. But we're going to use handlebars as well. So we'll incorporate that in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and pull in Express, body parser, and we'll pull in path. And I'm going to set up go ahead and instantiate my Express application. So I have a new Express app instance. And then let's go over here to Google. Let's go to body parser and click on the package link. Scroll down to the first block of code. And grab these two lines that have the comments on them. And then I'm going to change this to true. And so body parser is set up, and then I'm going to go to Express handlebars. Go to that package link. Scroll down, grab these two lines. And then I need to import it up here. So I'm just going to do const, just paste that, and require Express handlebars. All right, so now Express handlebars is set up, but since we're declaring that we're going to be using a default layout file, we need to go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to make a folder called views, And inside of that, we need a folder called layouts. And then a file called main.handlebars. The main.handlebars is important because we're saying right here that our layout file is called main, right? And that lies within views, which is required, and then layouts, which is required, and then main.handlebars. And in here, I'm just going to go ahead and do our basic markup. And we'll do coffee shop app or something. And here we'll do our triple handlebars, our curly braces, and output our template file code there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just run app.listen. I'm not going to create a variable to store the port today. I'm just going to pass in 5000. I'm going to use an arrow function here to one line this and just say listening on port 5000. And then right here, we're going to put all of our routes in a second. But for now, I'm going to play around with my models. So the easy way to import them is just to say shop equals require, and then we say /models. And then, now that I'm pulling in the folder, Node.js by default, if there's an index file inside the folder, when you try to import the folder, it's going to look for that file, and if it finds it, that's what it's going to import. So what are we importing? Once again, we're importing this object right here that contains all of our models. So all I have to do on this now, since this is an object, is grab the shop property from that object. So .shop. We'll copy this, and I will say coffee. So now we have our two models imported. So let's try something. Let's say shop create. And to create a shop, we need just a name, right? So I'm going to say Starbucks. Then we have the shop, right? So ES6, if you only have one argument being passed in, one parameter, you don't need the curly or the parentheses for the parameter. You can just leave those off, and it still works just the same way. And what we're going to do in here, though, is I'm going to go ahead and create a coffee that's associated with this shop. So now that we've made the association here in our coffee and in our shop, because of that, the shop instance or the shop object that's been created right here, which if you didn't know what's happening, when we create that new shop item, it's going to be passed right here to the then callback. And every single one of these items now will have a method attached to them, or a few methods actually. And these methods are created through the associations. One of them is create coffee. So you're probably wondering, that's weird, but yes, it looks at the model name of the associated model, and it creates a method that will attach the associated ID of the shop to that new coffee item for you automatically without having to create a coffee and do it manually. This method will do all that for you. So in here, since we're creating a coffee at this time, we're going to be passing in the name of the coffee. I'll say like Colombian. And then the type is going to be like dark roast, so I'll just say dark. And then we will do just a callback and say console log worked. And if that's all good, we should be able to create the item. So I'm going to run node server.js. And there we go. It says worked. So if I come back to our database and refresh our shops, we have our Starbucks item added. And if I go into coffees, you'll see that I have the Colombian added. And the shop ID is 1, right? Because the ID of Starbucks is 1. So that's the association. Anytime I create a coffee for Starbucks, it's going to have the shop ID of 1 right here attached. Okay, so now we're good with the relationship. We know that it's working. We ran a little test here to see if it was. So I'm just going to comment this out. And I'm going to give myself a little room down here. Let's start creating our routes. So how I'm going to work this is I'm going to have like the main root route, and it's just going to load a view which is going to show our coffees or show our shops, and it's going to have a form that's going to let us enter a new shop, and also each one of the shops is going to have like a little form to enter in a coffee. So let's go ahead and set up our root route. So slash, and I'm using the arrow functions as well here. Here we're going to get all the shops. So I'm going to do a find all. Excuse me. And there's one important property here, and this is include. So the include property lets us pull the associations in when we're finding all of an item. We can also find all the associated like child items or whatever with this particular model, right? So since I want to get all the coffees of this shop, I just use the include property and then pass it an array, and then that array is going to contain all of the associated models. So since our coffee is associated with the shop model, we are going to pass that model in. So if you don't remember, we have it right here. So that's what I'm passing in right here. So since we did that, we're going to get something cool with that. So if I just call this, before we mess with the actual view, let's go up here and let me show you how that works. So right below here, I'm going to do shop, find all, and we're going to do include, pass an array, coffee, then shops, and let's console the shops that we get back. So since we've saved one now, we should be able to run this, and we see that we have an array in the first object here, ID of 1, Starbucks, right? But check this out, we have this coffees property, and it's an array. So this property contains all of the associated coffees with Starbucks. That's pretty awesome, huh? So if I grab that first object out of the shops array, and let's just console log coffees, run this again, and there we go. We get an array of all the coffees. So we only have one right now, Colombian, but you see how easy this is to get all the associated items with the shop. Really awesome. I'm going to go ahead and run nodemon. It's going to, I didn't set up the file, so let's run nodemon server.js. There we go. So now I don't have to keep going back and canceling and restarting the server. I'll let nodemon do that for me. I'm going to comment this out as well. So now that we know that what that does, we're going to, at this point, res.render our template. And we're going to render the index template, which we haven't created yet. I'm going to pass it a property of shops, and that's going to be set to our shops array that we get back from the database right here. So let me go ahead in our views folder, create an index.handlebars file, just so we have that. And well, I guess let's go ahead and create another route. So we have our view route pretty much set up here. We also need a route to actually create a new shop. So this is going to be a post route, of course. So from the front end, there's going to be a form that's going to send some information through. And our route's going to be shop. So when the form submits, it's going to go to /shops. We're going to get the request and response. And it's really easy to create a shop, correct? Because all we have is a name property. But we can make it even easier by simply just passing in the request.body here. So request.body, as everybody's should be fully aware by now, is the object of information sent through from the form. And that form object is going to have the name property and whatever they typed in as the name. So all we have to do is just pass that object in. So then we're going to just go ahead and call this callback, or run this callback, and then just redirect them to the home page again. So as I mentioned before, redirect simply just calls another method that you set up, or another route that you set up. So this route is going to be called again. It's going to load all the shops and then re-render the index. Okay, so that's the simple add a shop route. We also need a route to add a new coffee. So another post route. And this path, the URL, is going to be a little different. So we're gonna send the information to /coffee, but I'm also going to add another end of this URL, and we're going to use like a placeholder. So placeholders in Express are created using the colon. And this is a query parameter, or a parameter basically, and it's dynamic. So whatever number, when they create a new coffee, when we submit the form from the front end, there's going to be a number that's going to be sent through. Maybe like 1 or 2 based on the ID of the shop. So we want to get the ID of the shop. Now I can just say like any name I want. So let's do shop_ID. How about that? So now our parameter name is going to be shop ID, and we can use that inside the actual route when we're setting it up. So here I will do request, response, and then here we're going to create a new coffee. So I'm going to run coffee create, and we're going to pass in the request body. So request body is going to contain the name of the coffee and the type of the coffee from the form when they fill it out. But I also want to add my own extra property here. So in order to do that, we're going to use something in ES6 called the spread operator. So if I do ... request.body, it's going to grab the body object, and it's going to pass all of the properties from that body object into this empty object. So the name and the type will be passed in. And then right after this, I can comma and add another property of my own, which is going to be shop ID, because remember we have to create that shop ID to associate this coffee with its shop. And this is going to be the request.params in this case, because how do we access these dynamic values that we're setting up here? So I want to get the number that they sent through for the shop, but I couldn't just type in manually 1 or 2 or 3 because I don't know which number is going to be sent through, right? So this allows me to dynamically grab that number, right, from the form or from the actual request when they send it through. And we grab this with the params object and then the name of our dynamic query, right? So we do shop_ID. Okay, so then we're going to do then, and we're going to do response dot redirect again back to the home page. So once again, we'll just redirect back to this route and load the home page. So those are our routes. Really simple, few routes here, just to create a shop, create a coffee, and associate that coffee with its shop. Okay, so now let's go into our index template. So I'm going to close out a few files here. Let's go into our index handlebars template. And here we're going to start setting up our HTML. Okay, so not much HTML, but just a few things to really basic, try to keep it as basic as possible here to show you an example. I'm going to have a header up top, and this is going to be right above our form to create a new shop. So we're going to have a class called shop-form. We're also going to have a class column. So these two classes in my CSS, I've pre-made some CSS for this, and I won't be going through that today. But feel free to play with it and just check out my CSS. It's nothing too crazy, but I just wanted to make it look a little better than just straight HTML in the browser, because that would be pretty terrible. So our action is the route that we're sending this through, right? Sending this information to, and that route, of course, is going to be /shops, correct? So here I'm going to say /shops, and then our method is going to be post, and then for our input, it's just simply going to be a text input, and our related property, right, is going to be called name. So this is going to be the name of the shop. So the name attribute is important because the backend will be looking for this, right, to associate what you type into this input with this property right here. So when we send it through, backend's going to have that name property, which is going to be attached to request.body, correct? Okay, so I'm going to have a placeholder as well, and this is going to be just telling the user what to type into this box. So shop name, and then a basic submit button. Okay. And then right below this, I'm going to have another header, and this one's going to be the header for the shop listing, right? So I'm going to say shop header for the class, and then shop listing. And then we're going to loop through all of our shops that we're sending through. Remember, in the route here, I'm sending through the shops property, which the template will receive. And so I want to loop through every shop that we get here. But first I'm going to wrap all of those shop divs in a row. So I'm going to create a row using Flexbox. So I'm using a couple of Flexbox things today in this example. Feel free to check it out because Flexbox is really powerful. We have CSS Grid now too. All these great tools for layout in the browser. It's just amazing the power of CSS in 2018. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and start my loop. So we're going to use double curly braces and then hashtag and then each. So this is our handlebars each loop. So for each shop in the shops array, so the name of our property we're sending through, of course, right, is shops. So I place that in there. And then down here, I'm going to end my each loop. And then I'm going to create a div with a class of shop and a class of column for each shop object in this array. And then here I'm going to have an h2, and this will just contain the name of the shop. So remember, we can access the properties of the current object in the loop, right? So this is an array of objects. The current object in the loop, you can either access it long version with this dot name, so I'm getting the name property from that object, or the short version is just to take out this and just declare the actual property name. Okay, so then we're going to have a form nested in here, and this is the form that's going to submit the new coffee. So when we add a new coffee, we're going to be sending this to what? If you look at our route we set up, we're going to send this to /coffee, and then I need the ID number, right? So how do we get that? Well, let's check it out. If I do /coffee / we can easily get the ID of the current shop object in the loop just by simply outputting the ID. So I'm going to just do the double curly braces here and just say ID, and that will pull the current ID number of the current object in the loop. As simple as that. So here's the real number, the actual number we're outputting here. That's what we're submitting to. And here, this will dynamically grab that number, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. And here I can get that number by using this dynamic query that I set up here. Really cool stuff. And then the let's see, method is going to be post. We're also going to add a class of column to this. And then it's going to be 2 inputs, right? We have the name of the coffee and the type of coffee. So the first one's going to be name, placeholder, and then coffee name. Second one's going to be the type of coffee. And then just a simple button that's going to say add coffee. Okay, so there's our form. So then we're going to have an H3 right below that, and this is going to be the listing of all the coffees for this particular shop. So now I need another each loop, and this is going to be a nested each loop. So when you nest an each loop inside of another each loop in handlebars, you can access properties from the current object in the parent loop. So since this is our shops array, right? Each one of those shop objects has a property called coffees, right? Remember that we get that property coffees, and it has all the associated coffees with that shop. I can easily loop through that property just by stating that property in this nested each loop. So if I do this, this is referring to shops, or the current object in shops, dot coffees. So really easy, and makes it super quick to grab nested objects or arrays from your parent object in the loop. Okay, so here I'm going to, for each coffee, we're going to create a class or a div with the class of coffee. This is going to have an H4 with a name of the coffee, and then a paragraph. And we're going to output the type, so dark, medium, light. And I'm going to say roast right after that. So it'll be like, it'll output like dark roast or medium roast. And we can also do something in handlebars to accommodate or to allow for empty values. So if we don't have any coffees for the shop currently, then we can do something here to output some other HTML in the case that no coffees have been saved yet. So I'm going to do a simple else, and then right below here we can write any HTML that's going to be outputted if coffees is an empty array and has no values in it. So I'm going to do an H4, and I'm going to, let's see, H4, and this is going to have a class of empty, and I'm just going to say no coffees, oops, have been added. Like that. And I believe that's it. That's all the HTML we need. I'm also going to go back to our server.js, and right here I'm going to say app.use and then express.static and then path join __dir name, and then point to a public folder with inside of our Sequelize migrations example folder. Right, so remember, this is the way to set up your front end files, right? Any files that you want the browser to have access to out of the box, because remember, all these files are blocked. The front end does not have access to them unless we specifically do give them access or send them the file or something like that. So I'm going to create a folder called public, and now that we have added this line to our server file, any file or folder inside of public is now accessible on the front end in the browser. So we're going to go ahead and create a folder in there called CSS, and then a file called style.css. And in this case, like I said, I'm not going to go into the CSS that I made for this. Of course, feel free to check it out. I'm just going to copy over and paste that in. So here's all the CSS. And just a quick little summarization. I made, did some basic resets. I made some global classes. You saw the ones that I used, right? Row and column. Wrap is just to make sure that the row wraps if the items can't fit in the row. That's all Flexbox stuff. And then down here, we just have some custom classes that I made for each one of the items, and not many advanced things going on here. So pretty basic CSS just to make things look a little better. Okay, so now getting back to our server file, there's one thing that I did not do. In the coffee relationship here that I ran, we can pass a second argument into this, and it's going to be an object. So these are optional options that you can pass in if you need to, right? And the foreign key is the important thing here. So when I say foreign key, I'm referring to shop ID, right? And it's camel case right now, so lowercase and then a capital I and D, right? So that's camel case. By default, though, Sequelize will be looking for a Pascal case, and Pascal case is simply the first letter is capitalized, and then every word after that is capitalized. So I don't want it to be the default Pascal case. I want it to actually be the camel case. So I'm going to specify that shop ID should be camel case. So I'm going to say foreign key, this, and then we can actually designate what that foreign key is going to be. So I'm going to just set it to the shop ID camel case that I want it to be, like this. Because like I said, the default is like this. But we're going to set it to that. And now we should be all good to go. If we come back, let's just make sure there's no errors. And if I go to localhost 5000, oh, I did not load my CSS file, so let's do that. Let's go to layouts and main and pull in that CSS file. So css/style.css. Now if I refresh, there we go. Okay, so you see it's really basic, but check it out. We have a little form up here to add a new shop, and then our shop listing, and then this is going to list out all of our shops, right? And you see we have already created one. So we see the little form here to create a new coffee, and then our coffee listing for that shop, and it shows our one coffee that we've added. But let me go ahead and try to add a new coffee. So I'm going to say Italian, and then this is a dark roast as well, usually. If I hit enter, there it is. It sent us back to the index template, and we see our new coffee that we just added. Awesome. Okay, so that works. So let's add a new shop. So I'm going to say Dunkin' Donuts. There we go. We get a new Dunkin' Donuts shop. And if you notice, we don't have the same coffees, right? No coffees have been added to this particular shop because this is a different item in the table. So if you look, the ID of 1, right? And Dunkin' Donuts is 2. And these 2 coffees are related to the shop with an ID of 1. So that's why this is not showing any coffees, right? But if I add one, let's add Colombian to Dunkin' Donuts. Hit enter. There we go. Now Dunkin' Donuts has a Colombian coffee as well. So this is the application, and I know it's it's going to take some time to go through it and work with it and play with associations and migrations to figure them out. But that's the key. You have to code. You have to try it, and you're going to face bugs and errors and all these different things. But in trying it and actually writing code and pushing to actually make the application work, you'll work through all those bugs. And hopefully this example will get you going and get you started on dealing with migrations and associations. All right, thanks everybody, and we will talk to you later on.